Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. Today we're transitioning just a little bit from the common culinary herbs you might grow in your garden that have medicinal uses to some that might already be growing all around you. I've said before that I tend to like my garden to look a little wild. Well, one of the reasons is I like weeds. Weeds that are useful, weeds that are edible, weeds that are medicinal. Some of these, I'm going to list some wild edibles here that may already be growing all around you. If not, you can cultivate them in your garden. And most people don't even know they're weeds if you're actually growing them in a row and letting them flower and everything. But I have a whole book on weeds and the medicinal weeds and grasses of the American South, and especially in terms of weeds and grasses. They're not by any means confined to the American South. In fact, most weeds are considered to be invasive species. They were brought here from somewhere else. In other words, our ancestors brought them here to be used as food and medicine. And for some reason, we got hooked on having these pristine green lawns and started calling things weeds. Well, they happen to be usually among some of the most nutritious and potently medicinal plants there are. And they're often growing wild all around us. And I mean, you're going to find these plants from well throughout the continental United States. I mean, from Maine to South Florida, from Oregon to, Southern California, and everywhere in between. A lot of these will grow in anywhere from a moist climate where I live to a desert. They grow up into Canada, they grow down into Mexico. They're great. Weeds need to be far more appreciated, and I have an entire book. It just was published earlier this year, as I said, called "The Weeds and Grasses of the American Medicinal Weeds and Grasses of the American Southeast." You can find it on Amazon, and the links to my blog and my Substack newsletter and everything are in the show notes, and you'll find a link there if you want to get it directly from me. Great place, great opportunity for me to just put in a little plug. Remember me when you're doing your Christmas shopping. My books make great gifts, and so does my woodcraft, my carved kitchenware, spoons, bowls, the baskets I make, one of a kind, unique items. I got some beautiful spoons and cooking spoons, scoops, different things on the site right now made from wild cherry, a wild cherry tree that fell in a winter storm in my yard, and a paper birch that did the same, and one of a kind, unique gifts that you're not going to find anywhere else. You're not going to buy something like that at Walmart, and the prices are incredibly reasonable. I always try to make everything affordable because I'd rather have people have something of mine and use it and appreciate it and pass it down than not. So, especially as expensive as things are at like Walmart and stuff these days with Bidenomics and inflation, my stuff's a pretty darn good deal, actually, and it's not made by slave labor in China. And also, as far as the book Medicinal Weeds and Grasses, if you gave someone a gift subscription to my Substack newsletter, the Southern Appalachian Herbs newsletter, um, they get a free ebook of their choice. And you could recommend the weeds and grasses or keep it for yourself, even. If you email me and say, I gave someone a subscription to your Substack newsletter, but I want the book myself, hey, it's your money. I'll send you the book. And the books, my ebooks usually sell for $9.99, and a 1 month subscription to the Substack newsletter is only $8. So you're actually getting a incredibly good deal if that was something you wanted to do. But now let's get on with the show. As I said, it's very important to learn to identify edible plants, and I'm soon going to have a whole book on foraging coming out, so look forward to that. But the edible and medicinal plants that are growing all around us, often called weeds, are really worth cultivating as well. For instance, dandelion is one we've discussed. Burdock is one we've discussed. Purslane, pokeweed, wild roses, all these are very medicinal. They're considered weeds. Poke has really pretty purple stems and everything. There's no reason you couldn't grow it in your garden if you weren't comfortable with that. Grow it in pots. And a lot of people used to do this more commonly. Yule Gibbons even wrote about it. They would grow several poke plants in pots so they could bring them in and eat the greens all winter. That way, poke greens are very delicious. They're very tasty. They're very nutritious. And, the berries and the root have some toxicity, but are medicinal. And so people would cultivate, even in town, people who had grown up in the country and liked to eat their poke greens would grow pokeweed in pots. And I do. I keep a couple in pots so I can overwinter them and have them when I want them. Or, dry some roots out in case I get a bad flu or something. It's a very good lymph purgative. Although the berries and the roots do have some toxicity, and you have to use that with care. Um, the instructions are in my herb books on how to do that. Dandelions, when you find them in nature, or chicory, the greens can be very bitter. If you grow them in the garden with good soil, the greens are not that bitter. And you have more access to the flowers if you want to make dandelion wine or syrup, or if you want to make a tea from the roots. Purslane will probably grow in every crack in your sidewalk. It's one of the best um, edible and medicinal plants, weeds so-called, to grow along the edges of walkways and garden paths. It likes, it loves the desert climate. So anywhere it can get some sun and dry out a little rocky, poor soil, it's going to do great. So, start thinking about incorporating these into your yard, but definitely learn to identify them in the wild, because it could save your life. If we were in a grid down situation, from war to another COVID lockdown to, it was about this time last year where I was in Moore County, North Carolina, visiting relatives, and we had a terrorist attack. Somebody shot up a power station, and like 3/4 of the county was without power on Thanksgiving morning. Um, People couldn't go to the grocery store to buy food. If you know how to identify food around you, fortunately we had just stocked up for Thanksgiving meal, so there was turkey and there was collard greens and potatoes and everything we needed, and I just had to rig up a little grill and start, doing my normal kind of hillbilly cooking, and everything came together just fine. But a lot of people had to go to emergency shelters and such because they didn't have heat or food. No, that's why we do this as preppers. It can be a winter storm, it can be a hurricane, or it can be a terrorist attack, and you really do, or another COVID lockdown. Um, you really do need to be ready. One of one of the ones that you can really grow as an ornamental is nasturtium. We'll get into that in a minute, but that's a very pretty plant. Chrysanthemum, by the way, has and there's an edible chrysanthemum. And all the chrysanthemums have medicinal properties. So we'll get into that a little bit. But let's start with something you're going to see around you pretty commonly. They're docks and sorrels. There are garden docks and sorrels. They've been cultivated. They've been improved, as they say. They're not quite as bitter or tough. And they're in high demand in high-end grocery stores and restaurants. They're some of the tastiest salad greens and pot herbs there are. They're two different herbs. They're really used interchangeably, though. In fact, really up until all the taxonomy guys started doing their work, um, docks and sorrels, the same name was used for either. Now, a sorrel can be anything from sheep sorrel, which is common weed in North Carolina, to wood sorrel, which most people call shamrocks, to those garden sorrels. Docks come in all different shapes and sizes. Usually find them where the ground's a little damp. Very abundant where I live. They're very tasty. I throw them in with everything. Red dock is pretty common where I live. Bloody dock is actually a popular garden ornamental because they've gotten it to where it has green leaves, but it gets these red streaks through it. Very pretty as a plant. You could definitely grow this in an HOA or POA garden, and really very nutritious, very good for you. The wild varieties of the herbs are generally stronger medicinally, and really they're so common in my area. I don't grow these in my garden. I can go out anytime between spring and really early fall, even mid-fall in some spots, and collect all the docks and sorrels I need. They're a weedy type of plant. They grow in disturbed soil or what you call waste places. Docks especially like a little dampness. Um, So be careful if there's contamination from a road runoff or a field where somebody's done a lot of pesticides. Um, sorrels. I mean, in old worn-out cotton fields and such, down in central and eastern part of the Carolinas, where like nothing will grow, the ground has been so contaminated, so stripped of all nutrition. You'll find sheep sorrel growing throughout. We used to call it sourweed as a kid. It was probably the first wild plant I learned to forage, actually. So if you lived in an environment like that, where you did have a lot of pesticide damaged land and chemical fertilizer has been dumped on there for centuries and all that, you might want to grow them in your garden because you really don't know what might be running off those fields. Also very popular. They would just spray the fields down with sludge, municipal sewage essentially, as a fertilizer. And you don't know what's in there. I mean, people pour all kinds of stuff down their sinks. They take all kinds of pharmaceuticals. So in that case, if you don't live like in the pristine mountains where I live, yeah, I'd probably get a pack of seeds and grow them in a garden bed. But most times, you can absolutely find them in the wild. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is go fishing, and I've said this so many times. But if you maybe it's the first time you've heard the show, I catch some trout, have a campfire right by the creek. I go find myself some sorrel, usually some wood sorrel, like that looks like shamrocks, or maybe some docks, and it's lemony, right? It has a lemony flavor. So I will stuff my fish with that and a little wild onion, salt and pepper. Usually maybe wrap it in bacon and fry it in a pan, or wrap it up in burdock leaves and cook it directly on the campfire, the coals, not in the flames, but in the coals. Fantastic. One of the best meals you'll ever have in your entire life. The lemony flavor, though, the citrusy flavor, comes from oxalic acid. So you would not want to rely on these plants as a primary source of your diet. In other words, you wouldn't want to you wouldn't want to use them as like your survival staple, even though they do grow very abundantly. Oxalic acid can actually inhibit the absorption of calcium and other minerals. So a lot of, sometimes you'll read people just really warning against it. I don't think it's any big deal. I mean, if you had a small serving of them a day, no big deal. I mean, even a fairly moderate serving of them a day, or if you just eat them seasonally like I do, I don't see any problem unless you just, gorge yourself on them 3 meals a day every day. But, take it with a grain of salt. Trust the experts. I'm not a doctor. I just kind of know from my own experience. Like with poke greens, poke salad doesn't bother me. Some people are so afraid of the poke plant, it's crazy. I use it both edibly and medicinally, no problem. I've read such crazy statements as you have to boil the greens 3 times and then fry them in fat, or they'll make you really, really sick. Well, I actually just eat them raw sometimes. I mean, maybe it's just me. Maybe I have a stronger constitution. Maybe because I grew up eating them, I built up a tolerance. I have no idea. I do know that if you had a very strong poke root tincture and you took a large amount of it, it could kill you. That's true. But, every year or so, some kids will go eat the berries and parents start getting frantic and call them poison control. And they're just like, calm down. The kid's going to throw up and be okay. And the kid throws up and he's okay. But, kid with a very weak constitution could get very sick. I'm not saying don't listen to the warnings. It's just, use some common sense. They used to sell poke salad, the greens, and poke shoots in cans in grocery stores, even when I was a kid. Nobody, freaked out about things the way they do now. So I guess really the only real warning I would give on that oxalic acid. Oh, golly, I got to reposition myself in the chair here. Oh, my knee is still just trash from falling off that ladder a couple weeks ago, but it's getting better. I'm not complaining. I just can't cross my legs for very long. All right. If you have rheumatoid arthritis or are prone to kidney stones or hyperacidity, then you would probably want to be pretty careful. And even then, you're still looking more at large amounts, larger than most people are going to eat, in my opinion. But use your own common sense. And remember, always listen to the disclaimer at the end of my show. I give no medical or dietary advice. I just tell you what I think. These herbs have astringent properties and laxative properties primarily, and were very popular in Elizabethan England. In fact, Culpeper, who was herbalist in the 1600s,